Welcome to the Disrupt Your Career podcast, brought to you by Claire Harbour
and Antoine Tirard. We're passionate about helping everyone find fulfillment in their work life.
We believe that big, messy, uncharted career changes are inevitable, and it's up to you to decide.
Will you take control and disrupt, or allow yourself to be disrupted?
We wrote the book about it, and now we share here our conversations with other thinkers in this crucial area.
Settle down and get ready to listen to this dose of wisdom.
So, in today's episode of Disrupt Your Career podcast, we've got with us a rather extraordinary guest, Joe Owen. Joe's a sort of modern-day leadership guru with an incredible story to tell. His work today includes chairing and advising huge educational organizations, writing, coaching, and consulting. And frankly, my words are going to be inadequate in a brief introduction. So luckily, we will be getting you to talk about your career, Joe. But essentially, we're really honored to have you join us today. Thank you for coming.
That's quite an introduction. I don't know how I've got to follow it, but we'll do our best.
know you can. You know you can. Let's then start, if you will, with your career journey. You've been through several, if not many, pivots and challenges in your career, from being a partner at Accenture, creating a business bank, and being one of the founders of Teach First, which is now the largest graduate recruiter in the UK. You also worked with tribes across the world to discover what business leaders can learn from them. Would you mind sharing with us how this extraordinary career has unfolded and tell us the truth about how much it was by design and how much by serendipity?
I think I'm living evidence that career is both a noun and a verb. Some people have a career noun and other people career through life, and that is definitely me. So an awful lot of what has happened, I've just been very lucky. But as with all the leaders I interview, they all say, I've been very lucky, but I made my own luck as well. So, yeah, I started with a classical business career and Procter & Gamble. I'm now going to brag hopelessly. I was the person who put the blue speckle in Daz. Now, that's quite something to think about. And arguably, my career has been downhill ever since then, but always sort of taking the more interesting, challenging road rather than the more predictable one. So when I was asked to go and build a business in Japan without speaking Japanese, I thought, well, how can I possibly refuse that? And then deciding to start a bank, why not? And then starting Teach First came out about simply by listening to a radio in San Francisco. KFOG plays good music like The Doors and Dire Straits, so that dates me. They interrupted music to do a little interview, and I didn't quite turn the radio off in time. The interview got interesting because it was about a brilliant project which got great teachers to teach in the inner city. So I called KFOG, said, give me the name of the program, Teach for America. I called Teach for America. I said, I want to speak to Wendy Cobb, the chief exec. Because I have a fruity British accent, I got straight through. And Wendy was very nice, but she clearly didn't want to be irritated by this sort of weird person from Britain. So she sort of fobbed me off and said, well, look, McKinsey in London sort of interviewed me about some project they're doing on education, and you might want to talk to them. So I called McKinsey, and they sort of fobbed me off by getting me to talk to this junior grunt called Brett Wigdorts. He said, yes, he was doing this research. And I said, no, you're doing the research, but I've got the answer. It's called Teach for America, and we're going to bring it to this country. And that is what happened. And quite a lot of other things happened in the meantime. But the point of that story is that opportunity is staring us in the face the whole time. It's there. You don't have to look for it. You don't have to be a genius. You don't have to have creative inspiration. Just listen and look, and the opportunities are there all the time. And that's how I became I'm an accidental leadership guru as a result, because when we started Teach First, the proposition was come and join us for twice the grief and half the salary that you can get elsewhere, which when we thought about it, perhaps wasn't the best graduate recruiting proposition.
It was honest, but not necessarily seductive, right?
It was distinctive, but like twice the grief and half the salary. Already, and some people do want to sign up for that, but most people sort of want something else. And so we said, actually, this is your best first step on the road to leadership, and we'll make you leaders of the future. Great promise. The only problem was we didn't have a leadership program, and we didn't have any money for a leadership program. So I rather airily said, well, that's fine. I'll just develop a leadership program, which then meant I went and interviewed these very grand people about what is leadership. And they all told me completely contradictory things. And I realized after a while they hadn't got a clue. They weren't telling me about leadership. They were just talking about themselves. So I thought, well, that's really interesting. That's really interesting. Because they're successful people, but they haven't got a clue about leadership. So I've spent the last 20 years trying to find out what is this leadership thing that everyone talks about, which is how I've become the accidental guru. I never set out to do it. But yeah, again, that's another thing where the opportunity just slapped me in the face. And I took it. So I don't really do regrets, but all I really wish is that, I'd be able to live another 100 years within the last 20 years, because that would have given me time to grab all the other opportunities that have been slapping me in the face, but I just haven't had the time or capacity to take them on. So that happens not just in terms of starting new businesses, it happens within firms as well. Endless opportunities. The only question is, are you the sort of person that wants to step up, or do you want to step back? And what I observe is that followers are actually smart. They do the sensible thing, because at those moments of crisis and ambiguity and uncertainty, which happen all the time, followers step back, see which way the wind is blowing. They don't expose themselves. And then once they see the way is clear, fine. They join the bandwagon and follow. Perfect survival strategy. Great. Leaders don't think like that. They look at those moments of crisis, ambiguity and uncertainty. They step up, not because it's all about me. They go, actually, I can see what we need to do. We just need to do it. And they do it. Okay. And as a result, they accelerate their career. They either succeed fast or they fail fast. But even if they fail fast, actually they've learned, and then they'll try again, and they'll try again, and they'll try again, and suddenly they'll succeed. And everyone goes, oh, wow, that's really amazing. It's like, well, there's a reason why they've succeeded, because they keep on trying to do it. So there's luck in this, there's careering in this, there's stepping up, stepping back, and having the courage. And I have been very lucky. I intend to continue to be very lucky, and I intend to continue careering, because it's just a huge amount of fun.
That's beautiful.
Sorry, that's a very long answer to a short question.
No, it's wonderful. And it makes me recognize actually the fact that the work that Antoine and I do together, we do because luck created an opportunity for us. We were talking maybe 10 years ago, hardly knowing each other at the time, about something completely different. And sure enough, in the conversation emerged the possibility that we might do a little bit of writing together, and that we might dabble in some ideas about careers and talent management and try and play a little bit differently to others. And sure enough, we did step up. We certainly didn't step back. We felt our way into something that nobody else was really doing in the way we were doing it. And we've had a lot of fun along the way.
And everyone has those conversations over a cup of tea.
It's a question of what you do with them, right?
Yeah, and most of those ideas die the moment you close the door afterwards. And it's like, well, no. If it's a good idea, you don't have to plunge in and sort of resign your job and start something new that day. But hook on to that idea. Start talking to other people with it. And quite often you'll find it, you have to change the idea. So when I started the bank, I started off by saying, well, we need to set up a retail internet bank. Well, that transformed itself into a bank focused on middle-sized corporates. You go, well, how did that happen? Well, I just talked to a lot of people, and it sort of slowly formed itself, and it was quite natural. So the idea you start with may not be the idea you finish with. That's fine. But the more you talk, the idea just gets better over time. And secondly, you actually discover who your team is going to be, because you'll have lots of frightfully clever experts who show how clever they are by pointing out all the problems of your idea. And that's like, great, thank you very much. You're clearly not on the team. You're not the right sort of person. But there'll be a few people who go, well, that's a completely crazy idea. Let me tell you why. But actually, if you think about it this way, it could actually work. And you go, that's the person I need, right?
Yes, yes.
The idea, and then as the idea gets strength, there is a moment where you suddenly realize the stars align, and you've now got to make a decision about, do you run with it or do you ditch it? And that's the kind of hairy moment. And there are ways you can manage that, but just run with the idea.
Absolutely. So I'm thinking that you've already shared many of your sort of key philosophical ideas about what leadership is and what it looks like. I'm wondering if we could look at it from the angle of how you build leadership. What are the myths and skills and ways that you see that a young or mid-career professional could be thinking about and putting into action in order to be able to build their management and leadership skills?
I'm sorry, even before we get onto that, what is leadership? People talk about it. Then you say, well, what is leadership? And they can't define it. And if you can't define what leadership is, I'm sorry, you don't know what you're talking about. It is as simple as that. And it turns out it's very difficult to define. The only definition that I have found that works comes from Henry Kissinger, who has just celebrated his 100th birthday. You may love him, you may loathe him, but he was an exceptional Secretary of State in America, achieved a lot of things in his time, and was a refugee. So remarkable backstory. And his definition of leadership is this: leaders take people where they would not have got by themselves. Boring. Sorry. Sounds boring, but before you all go to sleep, Kissinger was devious, so there's a lot in there. Let's hit that again. Leaders take people where they would not have got by themselves. That means leadership has nothing to do with your title. There are lots of people with grand titles, such as chief executive, president, prime minister, who aren't leading. They're administering a legacy. They're following popular will. They're doing what their constituents want, which is fine. It's sort of managerial, but it's not leading. Okay. Equally, I was speaking with a porter recently, hospital porter, and he was saying, when I got here, everything was complete bloody mess. He was saying it was a nightmare. All the wheelchairs were in the wrong place the whole time. So patients couldn't get where they wanted to. We couldn't get them to the right ward on time. And we weren't allowed to change anything because, those were the rules. So I said, well, stuff this. I'm just going to change it anyway. So I got together with the porters, figured out where all the wheelchairs should be. And we've now got a new system where all the wheelchairs are in the right place at the right time. And we move them to where they need to be. And everyone's really happy with it. So porter by name.
Leader by definition.
Leader by definition. So leadership is great, and it's nothing to do with your title. And if actually you want to be the leader at the top, you've got to start leading now. You've got to start learning how to do it now. So with that in mind, how do you actually learn to lead? Okay, so this is a question I ask a lot of groups. And to help them, I give them 6 options. And I let them choose 2 of the 6 options, main sources of learning. Okay, so you may want to try this yourself, and I now have to remember the 6 options. Here they are. Books, courses, bosses, good or bad lessons, actually, role models, inside, outside work, peers and colleagues, and personal experience. Okay, so you've got 2 choices. I'll go through them again. Books, courses, bosses, role models, peers, and experience. Think about that, make your choice, and with a suitable drum roll, I will reveal the universal answer that I get from courses and workshops. Here it is. Books and courses, nul point, nothing, 0, more or less, which is a bit of a disaster for an author that delivers courses. Okay? Bosses, role models, and peers get a reasonable number of hands up on each of those, and then personal experience gets a forest of hands. So basically, everyone learns from observed experience or personal experience, which actually is brilliant. That is right, because what happens is you learn about what works for you in your context. So it may be theoretically wrong, it is perfectly right. You see someone do something smart, you think, oh, I know, I'll try better at that. You see someone blow up, and you think, I'll tell you what, I won't make that mistake. I'll make my own mistakes. Thank you very much. Okay. And slowly you figure out that secret source of success. But there's a problem with that. The problem with that is a random walk to leadership. It's a random walk to the future, which makes it very slow and very painful. Because if you bump into good bosses, role models, and experience, you accelerate your career. Bump into bad role models and experience, and boy, we've all had those.
Oh, yeah.
All have those, and we will continue to have them. You hit a career dead end very, very fast. So do you really want your career to be a random walk to the future? So this is where books and courses come in. They actually help you put some structure on that random walk, and they help you make sense of the nonsense that you encounter day to day. Now, you can't start a book on page 1 and finish it on page 278 as a perfect leader. Except, of course, unless you're reading one of my books, I have to say that. Otherwise, I get into real trouble with my publishers. Okay, so they go, please, buy all this book. All they do is they help you structure that journey of learning, and they help you accelerate your learning. Now, there's one other thing that you can really do to accelerate your learning today, right now. Okay, it's this. After every significant moment, which could be an important phone call, it could be a meeting, it could be a presentation, ask yourself 2 questions. 2 questions. And you can ask this of yourself, you can ask it of your team. Question 1. What went well? Capture yourself succeeding. When something goes well, we think that's the normal order of events. It isn't. Stuff is always going wrong. I mean, it just has to go wrong. So if you actually make something work, you've done something well to make it work. Okay, so stop for 30 seconds, not to just indulge yourself in patting yourself on your back. You can do that, but learn, what did you do well that made it work? Okay, that's your secret sauce. And then people say, well, yeah, but of a disastrous meeting. Tell you what, start by asking what went well, because you probably did something in that meeting or event that stopped it becoming a complete catastrophe. And that learning is like gold dust. So hang on to it. So everyone must go, yeah, but what about the bad stuff? Yeah, the stuff that went wrong. Okay, fine. Let's deal with that. Okay, that's the second question. You don't ask WWW's evil twin what went wrong, okay? Because that's just a recipe for backstabbing politics, and you learn nothing, and okay, you destroy the team, you feel rubbish, etc. Ask a different question. EBI, even better if. It would have been even better if. So I do this with sort of even senior and experienced sales teams, and the sort of things they come up with, even experienced sales people, they say, well, what do you mean even better if I'd actually done a little bit more preparation on the people that were going to be in that room to understand where they were coming from? It would have been even better if I actually backed off and talked less and listened more. It would have been even better if I had just asked a few smarter questions. And everyone goes, yeah, that's really good. And they learn from that. Now turn that around into the normal debrief, which is same points. It's like, why didn't you do the preparation properly? Why can't you just shut up and listen for once in a while? Why didn't you ask some sensible questions for a change? Now, when the debrief is like that, you don't learn anything. You have a bun fight, or a fist fight, or a knife fight, or a gun fight. I don't know. It's going to be nasty, though.
Absolutely.
So ask yourself those 2 questions, WWW, EBI, because that's about not learning accidentally from experience, but learning very intentionally and very purposefully. Yeah, make sure that you get a day's worth of learning out of a day's worth of experience. The problem is quite a lot of people get a day's worth of learning out of a year's worth of experience. And that's really poor. So make every day, every meeting, every event really count and really work for you. The learning's out there the whole time, and you've got to discover your own secret sauce. And that's what will levitate you to the top. And everyone will go, how do you do it? And it's like, well, WWW-EBI, thank you very much. And of course, read my books.
Obviously.
I keep on forgetting that. Obviously, sorry, I should always say that. Yeah. Okay.
Fantastic. How does this translate into what it takes for global teams to succeed? You've done a lot of research in this field, and our listeners are a particularly global audience. They come from literally 99 countries in total, as we've analysed it most recently. And we know that many of them work with people from different time zones, languages, and cultures. And certainly will find your work interesting in this respect. So what are your key learnings from the research that you've done on global teams? And what tips do you have for team members, leaders, and organizations beyond WWW and EBI, which I'm sure is a big part of it? But what can we talk about to help people on global teams really define how their success might look?
They are really hard. And the good news is, if you can lead a global team, you can lead any team. Because it's sort of leadership on steroids, and it's particularly relevant in the whole post-pandemic world of hybrid working, because actually many of the lessons of global working apply to the world of hybrid work as well. So if you get the chance to work on a global team, yeah, it's tough, but that's exactly what you should embrace, because you're going to learn the lessons that are going to make you a really good leader. So I spent years researching this with teams right around the world about what works and what doesn't work. So if I just summarize, I suppose, about 4 years of research in 3 words, here it is. Everything is harder. That's it. Everything is harder on a global team. You've just got to execute all the basic disciplines better, which goes back to the point about if you can lead a global team, you can lead any team. So go for it. Now, within that, there are a couple of wrinkles that are actually major wrinkles that you've really got to focus on. When I started out, I thought that both culture and language would be the dominant problems. But when I look at the list of the top 10 challenges that global teams report, culture and language simply aren't on that list, okay, which is interesting. Partly because when you're on a global team, you know that people come from a different culture. You kind of make the adjustment. You're much more sensitive to that. Yes, there are misunderstandings on the way, but you recognize that they're misunderstandings. They're not people being unpleasant, incompetent, or Machiavellian. It's like, no, this is a global team. And so there's a mindset bit that goes behind this, working on a global team, which is about professional regard. So assume the best of your fellow professionals, and that if there is a problem, it's not because of incompetence, Machiavellianism, or whatever it is. It's professionals trying to do their best, but something's got lost in translation. And there's also a huge bit about curiosity and adaptability. So when I was working in Japan, I'd regularly bring people across to help out. Half of them would wash out within 3 months simply because they couldn't adapt. They just thought, yeah, I'm here to do it my way, the American way, the French way, the whatever it is way, and it doesn't work. And they just couldn't cope with it. So you've got to have curiosity and adaptability and professional regard. Now, systemically, there are 2 things that really, really are the most challenging things that every global team talks about, and here they are. First of all, communications, and second, trust. And actually those 2 things go together, because good communication fosters good trust. Poor communication leads to poor trust, and equally high trust fosters good communication, and poor trust leads to no communication. So the 2 absolutely go hand in hand. The communications bit actually has 2 elements to it. One is just there's a sheer too much communication. That's a kind of mechanical problem. You've got to figure out the routines about when the team can communicate both synchronously and asynchronously, and when replies are expected and not expected. This is where the Europeans are both very lucky and sometimes lacking in understanding, because we tend to be in the best time zone. Global calls tend to happen early in the morning, or very, very early in the morning on the West Coast, and very late in the evening in Japan. And it's like, well, always in the middle of the day in Europe. And people go, well, what's the problem? So there's just a mechanical bit on communications. But actually, far the bigger bit on communications, it's not about the quantity of communication, it's about the quality of communication. The tragedy is that we communicate more than ever, but we understand each other less than ever. So it's not about communicating more, it's about communicating better and with trust. And that is where there are elements of culture and language comes in, because it is difficult. So how do you build that trust remotely? This is where we get to an awkward answer, but it's an important one. At one point, the research seemed to say that the way to build that trust was to sort of hire a castle in Kent and get everyone drunk there. It's a kind of useful answer, but it doesn't work in the Middle East. So you've got to come up with a slightly more sophisticated answer. The message is, buy that train ticket, buy that plane ticket, get the team together, find an excuse. It can be about training, it can be about planning, it can be whatever it is, but don't fill that event with business stuff back to back. Create time for people to just hang out, get to know each other, because that shared experience is great. Let me give you one simple example. I was speaking with a senior manager at a global search firm, and she had gone to Paris. The communications with the team had been sort of rubbish, really, and there was no trust in it. She was like, it was a nightmare. And then she had to go to London, but there was a French air traffic controller strike, plus ça change, so she couldn't fly, and she had to do something very un-American, which is take the train. And she had to get on the train with these team members that she didn't really know and like, and they didn't know and like her, and it was all like a complete mess. But they were stuck on this blooming train, sort of facing each other for 2.5 hours, and they had to talk to each other about the weather and how dreadful the French air traffic controllers are, and cats and dogs and all this. And she said it was like a miracle. It was like a miracle. Oh God, and all we hated each other, and at St Pancras we loved each other. And thereafter, the quality of communications went through the roof. The trust was through the roof. The performance was through the roof. And I just looked at her and I went, yep, that's it. Hello. Because it's so predictable. It is just so predictable that. So it sounds an unsophisticated solution, doesn't it? But just get together.
Well, I absolutely believe that most solutions to great work and lives involve reminding ourselves that we're humans to humans. And that's pretty much it. And if we treat each other like humans who are working together with other humans to sell products, to make and sell products or services to other humans, usually we can find a lot of guidance simply from that.
That is actually the teabag theory of leadership. Okay, so stand by for the teabag theory of leadership. In fact, there are two teabag theories of leadership. Here we go. First teabag theory of leadership is that leaders are like teabags. You only know how good they are when you put them in hot water. Okay.
Is that your invention, Joe, or is that coined from someone else?
That may come from somewhere else, but I think the second one is
it's wonderful.
The acid test of any leadership is that moment of crisis, and we could talk about how you deal with that. Okay. The second teabag theory of leadership is that there is no leadership challenge which can't be solved over a cup of tea. Just get a cup of tea, and it all solved up. And actually, that has kept me out of prison once.
Oh, we want to know that story.
So it was a very, very difficult sort of Middle East joint venture discussion. I was sort of meant to be the impartial chair. There was a member of royalty on one side, and it was going so badly that she just slapped a sort of hand on the table and said, right, I've had enough. You're going to jail. And stormed out of the room. Pretty
extreme, but...
So what do you do? What do you do? There was sort of slight stunned silence in the room, as you can imagine. So I gave it 30 seconds. I said, right, everyone stay here. I'm going to go out and see her. So now, there she is. She's ready for the fight. So what are you going to say to her? Because more or less anything you say is going to trigger a fight. So I said, so how about a cup of tea? Which is the one thing she wasn't expecting. She said, oh, all right. At which point the reaction would normally be like, click your fingers, servant, come and get me a cup of tea. So I said, right, why don't we go and make ourselves a cup of tea? So we went to the kitchen and made ourselves a cup of tea. And by the time we had finished making a cup of tea, and discussed what sort of tea and how do you like it and why on earth did Brits put milk in their tea and all this sort of stuff. I can't even remember what the problem was. The problem just disappeared. It was fine. And there are just so many stories like that.
This conversation is all the more beautiful for them. So let's go on. That said, I've got a question about this get people together thing. Obviously, there are some young people in their careers now who have actually never done anything other than work from home. And that's a big challenge because when they entered a company, they couldn't get together with others. And in some cases, I can think of clients and people I've talked to in the last couple of years still haven't actually met face to face with any of their team members. Now, we could just attribute that to the leader wasn't thinking very clearly about what would build trust. But regardless of that, how can we help these young people to maximize their career development and growth, despite being still relatively at the bottom and not decision makers, to be able to maximize their own careers?
I think the generation that has been through university and just entered the workforce during the pandemic, I think they've been massively shortchanged. I mean, they've missed out on the university experience, and they've missed out on vital experience at the start of their career. I mean, it's just been a disaster for them. So what do we do about it? Look, I think that if you have a firm that is 100% remote, and there are some firms that are 100% remote, especially in technology, you can make that work, okay? Because then everyone's on a level playing field, okay? The level playing field is important. The problem comes with hybrid work, because now you've created an unlevel playing field where people who are in the office have an advantage over people who are outside the office. It's only a small incremental bit, but when you're in the office, you're in the gossip flow, you're in the information flow. You get early warning of when the Death Star projects and the Death Star bosses are appearing, and you can take evasive action. You also get early warning of, here's the great project that maybe I could get onto. You get the mentoring. You build those networks of support. You figure out who you can work with and who you can't work with. So all of those tend to accelerate your career. That doesn't mean you have to be in the office the whole time. Let's be clear. You don't have to be in the office the whole time, but you need to be in the office often enough that you can build those networks of trust. You can build those alliances. You can pick up the culture. You can figure out how things, who you can rely on, who you can't rely on. You can do all of that sort of stuff. You can sort of do it remotely, but it's not as good. It's just not as good. I was reading just this morning about some sign writer who has painted the Sistine Chapel on a church roof in Goring-on-Sea, of course. And the pictures look wonderful. But actually, you know what? It's not the real thing. Okay. And it's brilliant, but it's not the real thing. And that's the difference between working remotely. Now, there are huge advantages to working at home. It's just a different sort of work you can do at home and different from being in the office. You've got to get the balance right. So actually, the answer bluntly is, as with global teams, you don't need to be in the office all together all the time. You're not going to be a global team then, are you? Or you're not going to be a hybrid. But you do need to get together sometimes.
I'd like to switch subjects now and talk about the stories that you've lived through and created in your various serially started up social enterprises, which are so often including attempts at addressing educational disadvantage. And so far, according to my research, you've helped at least 8 great charities, teams, and CEOs start up. And collectively, they've got over £100 million annual turnover and include, of course, Teach First. Tell us about your involvement, especially with STIR Education, where you worked alongside our friend and former guest on the show, Sharath Jivan. What is your role? What has been the impact so far? And what have you learned along the journey to creating true system change?
STIR Education, again, proves the teabag theory of leadership, because that started over a cup of tea, where Sharath, who was my chief executive of the previous organisation I was chairing, came to me with a slightly mad idea in his eyes about changing global education. And it's like, well, there you are sitting down, having a cup of tea, and you're saying, right, we're going to address UN, the United Nations Strategic Development Goal number 4, 600 million kids in school but not learning. And we have nothing between us except a cup of tea. So how do you do that? I mean, it's impossible. My formula for startup success has been consistent over the years. And where the formula has been applied properly, success has followed. And where it hasn't been applied properly, I've had the most catastrophic disasters, which don't appear on my CV, but I've learned an awful lot from them. And here's the formula. It's IPM. So I stands for idea with impact, ideally. You've got to have a great idea. So STIR, it was a great idea. The idea, the teachers are not the problem. Everyone said the teachers are the problem. They're terrible. I said, no, there is no solution to education in which teachers are not the solution. So they are the solution. But the problem is they're disengaged, demotivated, etc. So now our contribution will be, how can we re-energize, remotivate, and re-engage millions of teachers, officials, and children around the world in education, which is interesting. How do you do motivation at a system level? So big idea, no clue how to do it whatsoever, but that's fine. You've got to start somewhere. Second bit of it is P. You've got to get great people, right? Just great people. And in fact, that was the reason I backed Sharath. I basically gave him some money to test the idea, and I was assuming I was saying goodbye to the money, but of course, actually, Sharath is going to work miracles anyway. And then the M is for the money and the machine, because you can't change the world without balance of the books. You've got to have the money as well. The problem is that people often start with the M. In practice, if you've got a great idea and great people, you'll find the money. If you can't find the money, that's normally a sign that there's something wrong with the idea, or there's something wrong with the P, the people. 90% of your time will be spent on the money and the machine. But actually, it's the other 10%, the idea and the people. That's where the magic is. So at STIR, we started by doing micro innovations in Delhi slum schools, private schools, where slum dwellers get together a few rupees to send their children to a private school because they just don't trust the public education system. Since then, I think we're probably on about STIR 7.0. We have changed dramatically time and again. And that's the point. That if you want to change the world, the idea you first come up with will not be the idea you finish with. You can't design the future. You have to discover the future. So you have to go through this constant process of iterating and discovering, and it's painful, and learning and changing. And eventually you get to a model which works, which means that there's a curious dynamic that goes on. Before you've discovered what works, you have no right to grow. There is a moral imperative not to grow because you don't know what you're doing. But the moment you have discovered what works, there's a moral imperative to grow as fast as possible to make sure as many people benefit from it. And in my work with other charities that have really changed the world, it often takes about 7 or 8 years for them to actually figure out what the model really is. There are lots of charities that do great work, but they're addressing symptoms, not causes. They're remediating problems, okay? And that's fine. But that's not where I am. What I want to do is see if we can address fundamental causes, not symptoms. And to do that, that's where you need 7 or 8 years of discovery to figure out what it is. So we now have discovered how you build motivation at an intrinsic motivation at a system level with millions of teachers and officials and children. And that kind of blows away the traditional motivation industry, which is very much about, well, how do I motivate you? And it's like, well, no, that's the wrong thing. I mean, it just starts with the wrong question, because it doesn't matter how brilliant I am. I cannot tell you to be motivated, positive, or happy. I mean, it's nonsense. I can't do that. Being motivated, positive, happy comes from within. All I can do is create the conditions in which you discover or rediscover your intrinsic motivation, because we're all intrinsically motivated to do well. Professionals in particular want to do well. So if they're not doing well, it's not that there's something wrong with them, there's something wrong with their environment. And you've got to figure out, well, what can we do to make an environment in which people rediscover their intrinsic motivation? And if you look at it, the latest Gallup State of the Global Workplace poll, levels of motivation and engagement are at all-time record lows. All-time record, which tells us that the motivation industry is not working. We've had 50 years of motivation industry. It has failed. So doing more of the same is not going to suddenly start working after 50 years. You need a different approach. The motivation industry is based on that fundamental problem of, I'm going to motivate you. No, you're not.
Indeed.
We've got to change the question. It's like, how do I create the conditions which motivate? And we can go into what those conditions are, but I mean, that's fundamental insight.
It's depressing, but exciting, all in one answer.
But there is an answer there, which is the good news.
Absolutely. And all listeners should absolutely be making sure that they read the beautiful book called Intrinsic, because that will inspire more change, won't it? And that's an extraordinary thing. Now, we're coming close to the end of where we should be stopping talking, but I want to ask you one more thing about your 18-year-old self, the 18-year-old Joe. What advice would you give him if you could go back and talk to him now?
Sometimes ignorance is bliss, actually. So not knowing what life has in store is good, because I think if I'd known all that I was going to have to go through, I might have just sort of snuggled under a duvet and gone, no, thank you very much. Because just the highs are great, but the amount of effort you have to put in, the amount of grief you have to go through and all that. I mean, it's called life, actually, but it does take a lot of effort. So I think I'd just be saying one simple message: go for it. That's it. Just go for it. Just embrace life with both hands, drink deeply from the well of life. I enjoy every moment of it. This is how I finish every book. Look, we're all on different journeys. We have no idea what the future holds, but whatever your journey is, enjoy it. That's it. There's nothing else.
Thank you, Joe. That's beautiful. That's clearly where we end today. It's an important message. It's a simple one. Drinking from the well of life as well as from cups of tea, right?
Exactly. You've got it. Drink deeply from the well of tea.
The well of tea, indeed. Thank you so much for joining us, Joe.
Great. All right. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed hearing from this month's guest as much as we did.
Do go and check out our work on disrupt-your-career.com and come back soon. Thank you.